So on the screen, you can see a couple of sine waves and a resulting waveform. And let's start off with addressing what is a frequency modulation or FM synthesis. Well, frequency modulation synthesis or FM synthesis, unlike its brothers like the additive and the subtractive synthesis, works differently from both of them, in which that we use one wave to rapidly increase or decrease or otherwise modulate the frequency of another. So in this case, if we have a waveform which is a sine wave over here, we kind of modulate the sine wave with another sine wave so that we change its frequency spectrum across the frequency board. And that's why we call the major oscillator, or the oscillator that we hear, as the carrier oscillator, and the waveform that modulates the carrier oscillator as a modulator oscillator. So if we take a sine wave of a certain frequency range and we modulate it with another sine wave of, let's say, a lower pitch, we kind of get a resulting waveform which modulates in pitch. So that resulting waveform is what we hear as a result of both of them working together. An interesting fact is that we only hear the carrier oscillator. So the wave that modulates the carrier oscillator is called the modulator, and we actually never hear the modulator oscillator. We only hear the carrier, and that's how we get the resulting waveform. Now, if we start increasing, let's say, the frequency of the modulator, we get a change in pitch of the carrier oscillator, and we kind of see a waveform which is somewhat like this. So now let's jump into logic and let's see how FM synthesis work and how does it sound. So we have a free FM synthesis plugin here. It's called DEXED, and it is formed after the legendary Yamaha DX7 frequency modulation synthesis. And it's completely free, but it's amazing to understand. It's pretty awesome to get started with FM synthesis. So over here, I mean, I can understand that it's too overwhelming and we have a couple of knobs and a lot of parameters to be played around with. But let's focus on the first oscillator. So it's actually split into 6 oscillators. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it's all the same. It's kind of like a duplicate version of each other. And we have some algorithm here as well. We'll get to that a little later on. And we have some parameters here to play around with. So let's start focusing on the first oscillator. And we also have a oscilloscope so that we can actually see how the waveform is formed. So let's start off with initialize preset and let's create a sine wave from the first oscillator. So over here we have the envelope and the envelope rate. And please don't get confused with all of these knobs looking a little different, because these are reverse from the traditional knobs that we see in traditional synthesizers and plugins. It's actually sending the speed, not the rate. So let's start off with reducing all of the levels of the decay, sustain. It's actually ADS, so we have all of the levels down, and let's increase the attack level. So let's start off with decreasing the speed of the attack. This is a blip because it's kind of very fast. And this is kind of like increasing the attack. Let's slow down the decay, and it's kind of going down. So let's increase the volume so that it stays and it stops over there. Let's also slow down the sustain so that, and increase the volume. This sounds nice. And we have a basic sine wave. And as you can see on the oscilloscope, we have a typical sine wave that is formed. I'm not decreasing the release because we wanted to kind of end it ASAP, because if we decrease it, it's gonna ring out, right? So let's keep it at that. And we have a basic sine wave now. We don't have anything else that is going in the oscilloscope. You can see that we have a sine wave that is going. Now let's move on to the second oscillator, and let's also create a sine wave from that. And now the reason that we are not hearing the second oscillator is that the level is set to 0. So before I increase the level of the second oscillator, let's look at the algorithm section of a frequency modulation synthesis. Well, an algorithm in any frequency modulation synthesizer or plugin defines the relationship between a modulator oscillator and a carrier oscillator. So essentially there are about 32 algorithms on this plugin, and let me just switch all of the oscillators for now. And considering that we have all of the oscillators that are engaged with some sort of a sine wave, all of these algorithms would define the relationship between the modulator and the carrier, and we will have different tonal qualities and different sounds that might come because of these algorithms. Now, an interesting fact here is that you only hear the oscillators that are on the bottom row. All of the oscillators that are engaged on the second, third, and fourth row are essentially modulators, and it actually defines the relationship between the modulators and carriers. So in this case, if let's say we have all of the oscillators engaged, we would hear first, second, third, fourth, and fifth oscillator, but the sixth oscillator would be modulating the fifth and in itself. So these are few algorithms that we can experiment. In this case, if let's say all of the oscillators are engaged, we would only hear first, second, and fourth oscillator. The third oscillator would be modulating the first and the second, and it's kind of modulating in itself, and the fifth and the sixth are oscillating the fourth oscillator. So let's start off with looking at the first basic algorithm in which the second oscillator would be modulating the first, and let's switch off all of the other oscillators. We don't need them right now. So as you can see, we are only listening to the first oscillator, which is the carrier oscillator. It's on the bottom row. And we have the second oscillator, which is going to be the modulator oscillator that's going to be modulating the first. So now that we have created a basic sine patch on the first and also on the second oscillator, let's increase the level. So this is the sound of a sine wave by itself. This is just the carrier. And now let's increase the level of the second oscillator, which is the modulator. Now this is the resulting wave from the second oscillator modulating the first oscillator, in this case the modulator and the carrier, and now we have a frequency modulation synthesis. And this is the resulting waveform that we see over here in the oscilloscope. If we increase the level more, we get a higher pitch. If we decrease, the waveform kind of decreases in pitch. We can also increase the octave. And this is the resulting waveform. We can detune it to get a different texture. We can fine tune the pitch. And we have a frequency modulation with a sine wave modulating the carrier sine wave, and the resulting wave is somewhat different. It's very interesting. It's not a sine wave. And we have achieved an amazing frequency modulation. So likewise, if we kind of also engage the third oscillator in this case, and we have the first and the third oscillator on the bottom row, so we don't want to hear both of them. We want the third oscillator to modulate the second oscillator then modulating the first. So in this case, what will happen, let me just load that algorithm. So we have the third oscillator that would be modulating the second, and the resulting waveform would then be modulating the first. So we can achieve crazy amount of sonic capabilities and tonal quality. So let's increase the level of the third and let's hear how it sounds. So right now by itself, the second oscillator is kind of modulating this first oscillator, so the modulator and the carrier. And now let's increase the level of the third oscillator. it changes drastically. So now the resulting waveform looks like this. So in this case, the third oscillator is modulating the second, and the resulting waveform from that modulation is now modulating the initial sine wave. So you can imagine the unlimited possibilities with FM synthesis in creating various tonal qualities. And now you can go ahead and engage all of the oscillators. Let's do that for now, just for fun. And let's change the algorithm to, let's say like this, where we have the second oscillator modulating the first. So in this case, the second oscillator is the modulator and the first is the carrier. We will also hear the third oscillator, but the third oscillator is kind of modulating by a varied web of the sixth oscillator modulating the fifth, the resulting wave then combining with the fourth and then modulating the third, and the fourth oscillator is kind of oscillating in itself. So let's just increase the levels of all and change the pitch. So from just this, a simple sine wave, we are combining multiple sine waves and we are getting this through frequency modulation. And the resulting waveform looks like this. Pretty crazy and amazing. Now you can go ahead and post-process this and put in some LFOs. Over here I have a compressor and a reverb, and let's just hear how it sounds. It's kind of sounding like a FM stab. Pretty crazy and interesting. So there you have it, guys. That's the basics of frequency modulation and how it sounds, how you can create one, what is it. And please notice that I've just barely scratched the surface. This is as simple as it gets, but you can really get lost in creating complex sounds through FM synthesis. It's a world in itself. I used DEXED or DEXED, however you want to pronounce it, for this instance. It's an amazing free FM synthesis out there. There are many other paid ones also, and if I'm not mistaken, FM8 by Native Instruments is one of them. And it's not that difficult to understand. The UI is pretty intuitive. Over here in DEXED, we have the knobs which are kind of reverse with the traditional synthesis, because the lower that you get, the slower the attack or the decay is. So go ahead and check that out, but you can really kind of start using FM synthesis if you are a beginner using DEXED. I think Surge is also one of them, which is a free synthesizer, and it also has FM synthesis if I'm not mistaken. Vital from Matt Title is also one of them. However, you can only use 3 oscillators at one point of time. Over here we have 6 oscillators, so you can really go crazy and create your own patches and experiment it yourself. So let me know in the comments down below if this was helpful. Like I said, I barely scratched the surface and I made it as simple as it can get. But let me know in the comments down below if this was helpful and you would want to share your thoughts on any of the concepts that you found out through FM synthesis. Let me know, because it's crazy. It's amazing that you can really get lost with creating different sounds and your own sounds through various algorithms in FM synthesis. So there you have it, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I know this is a little different from my traditional self, but I really wanted you to guys focus on the screen and how the FM synthesis actually work and looks. So let me know if you found this helpful. It's always good to hear your thoughts and read your comments. As always, if you like this video, give me a thumbs up, and if you like what I do here, want to see much more videos like this, support the channel by subscribing and hit that bell so that you can stay updated. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Till then, cheers.